Hello, listeners and viewers, to the next episode of Welcome to Perth Catch Ups. Today, we have a very special guest. We're actually in his studio. He's got his own podcast. We'll get into that in a little bit, but I've got Trent Fleskens with us. He's the Managing Director of Strategic Property Group. Trent, how you going, mate?
Good. Thanks for coming in. Hey, you're one of the first people into our new office.
I love it. So you've just moved, it's only a kilometre up the road, but a bit of renos happening. Stressful last week?
Yeah, look, we outgrew, just like a goldfish outgrowing its bowl. We outgrew our old office about 300 metres down the road, and we've doubled in size and got a little bit more space now for a bit more of a breathe and a dedicated podcast studio now. So we'll soon have the Perth Property Show up on the logo up there on the wall, and we're literally in day 4 in the office, so still getting our bearings actually.
Love it. And so for those that haven't heard of that podcast before, what give us a summary of what it is.
So the Perth Property Show was started on the 2nd of December 2018. We're at episode 136, and we've gone for 136 Mondays in a row consistently. And the whole point of it was just to cut out all those spruikers trying to sell $30,000 useless education programs to Western Australians, and really just give West Australians real advice from real people from Western Australia. That isn't laced with some sort of pitch or sell at the end. It's free. There's no advertising. There's no marketing. No one comes on here and pays for it. It's very much just a case of me picking the best number one agents or experts in different fields of property law, tax, accounting, interior design, valuation, markets, all those sort of things, and getting them in and interviewing them, just in a similar way that you do. You handpick who you want to talk to, and then sharing that with all of our clients, our friends, and just people who are listening from afar.
So good, honest advice, and without the spruikers, because you do hear about those, horror stories where people go out to the big home and land packers out and, whoop and end up in negative equity, and they can't sell their house after 5 years, and then they want to relocate for work or whatever, but they're sort of stuck, aren't they?
That's the whole fundamental of this company, let alone this podcast, is that it's built for people just to get real solid advice and solid help, and not just handball services where people are taking commission through the middle and you don't really know what they've done. We actually look to try and help people here, and I think that's been a great foundation for the growth of the business.
And so to do 136 episodes, so you just did your 136 yesterday?
We just recorded it 2 hours ago.
Oh, well done. So for those that haven't done a podcast before, it's to do 136 in a row, that's on a whole nother level, because it's... they do take a bit of time and a bit of planning, even though it may just seem quite easy. You just, start having a chat with someone. So 136 in a row is huge. Do you have a number that you want to get to before it might turn into a monthly podcast, or what's your current plans?
I make myself pretty nervous actually, because I've sort of dug my own hole now. The whole point of this podcast was it was every Monday at 7 a.m. And I start to get a bit anxious about the fact of when can I ever finish this? I can't finish it. And with a lot of things in life, it's probably more important to you than it is to everyone else. So I'm probably the one worrying more about it than anyone else is about that consistency on a weekly basis. But I don't know when I would stop it. I guess when I stop enjoying it is when I would stop it. It certainly wouldn't be when I have not got enough time. I would always make time for it, because I think it's a really important institution now for a lot of people. I get people, if I've missed at 7 a.m. and it gets done on the Tuesday because I've just had other things on, people will text me and say, man, where's the podcast? I was really looking forward to that. And they sort of keep me accountable. Yeah. So look, I recognize that's important for a lot of people to learn and just to consume something, a little bit entertainment as well on the property side. But as long as people keep listening, we'll keep producing it, I think.
Because I've listened to other property podcasts, Property Couch and Smart Investment Show, but the thing I love about your podcast is it is about Perth. It is about what is happening right now in the market, where normally those other podcasts they mention Perth for 15 seconds and Perth, we're just keeping an eye on it.
Yeah,
we're
not
getting in there yet, but that's about all they normally say. So
they're happy to sell to us though.
Yeah, correct. Yeah. Take the mining dollars and invest it over at the East Coast. I love how specific it is. So well done on the podcast, mate, because I've been listening to it as well.
Well done on yours. It's also one that I think a lot of people listen to when you decide to produce one.
When we can actually make it all happen. So I'm glad we've made it work today. And now let's get into your story, mate. So how old are you at the moment?
31.
31. And you've done, and how long have you had this company for?
Yesterday was our 4-year anniversary.
Wow, big. And I was having a little look through your employment details earlier, and there was a little promotional period of your time. What was going on back in 2011 through to sort of what were you up to? You were refereeing. You were doing a bit of soccer refereeing. What else were you getting up to?
Over Christmas, I started doing interviews with different businesses, Bankwest, BHP, in the change rooms of different places when I was out in America with my mates, and landed in a job at Barrick Gold as a commercial analyst. Spent a few years there. The market crashed in the gold space, and I thought, look, it's probably time to move on to something that's giving me a bit more of a challenge too. And then ended up at ConocoPhillips as a strategic advisor in the oil and gas space. And each time thinking, and this is, I guess, one of the biggest lessons I've learned in my life, is that next job, that next pay rise is going to be what makes me fulfilled and makes me happy and makes me feel like I'm really achieving. And it just wasn't. I just wasn't in the right space. I was learning some really great skills. Don't get me wrong, they're skills I use every day: financial analysis, negotiation, strategy, those sort of things. But it just wasn't the topic. I wasn't really feeling like I was making a difference. What 15-year-old goes, Mum, I'd really like to help negotiate oil and gas deals in the Timor Strait with the Italians. It's just not something that you wake up every day and go, look, I'm really making a difference. You're helping a big multinational company make more money.
Yeah.
So it wasn't until I packed it all in after, refereeing as well as a hobby, getting to the A-League and realising that wasn't making me happy either. I'm much happier playing social soccer now with my mates on a Sunday. But packed it all in at 25 after 8 years in my career, and just I thought I was going to be a wildlife photographer actually, or a safari guide.
Love it. And now I do remember you telling me a couple of years ago when we caught up that you had a blog, a travel blog. So is that still going? I imagine it probably hasn't had much activity the last 18 months.
Yeah, it hasn't had much activity for the last 5 years, but I think it's riddled with viruses now as well because the plugins haven't been updated. But I've locked that down. It's still there, but it's password protected, and it's got about 100 blogs on there, about 100,000 words. And that's probably the foundations for setting the podcast up. That sort of setting your own website up with a travel blog and photography and all those little things, branding. It wasn't something I did at university, but all the things you look back on, that were just stepping stones to where I am today.
Love it. And so how long did you travel for?
I took a year and a half off.
Wow. And how were you financially able to take a year and a half off? You obviously were savvy enough with your money.
I started developing when I was 18.
That's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
I don't know anyone. Did your dad help you with that idea?
My dad has a couple of properties that he'd probably be happy to not have these days.
Yeah.
But the banking laws were a lot different back in 2008, just before the GFC.
The Wild West, we call that.
It was the Wild West, and I was on a small salary, but enough of a salary to get a loan for a piece of land. And I recognised at the time that I could buy that piece of land for $250,000. The build cost at the time, think about it now, was $150,000 for a finished 4x2.
Wow.
So it was $400,000, and I knew at the time that there were properties in that suburb for $500,000 they were easily selling. So I'd made $100,000 equity by just doing the build, and it's very hard to do that these days because you might see that in the future again as the market moves. But back then there was a differential in the market because it was so undersupplied.
And so were other people doing the same thing as well? Why did you... Obviously, you had an interest in economics. That's why you went to UWA and studied commerce. So, but not many people... I mean, I'm interested in business and I'm interested in property, but at 18, I didn't go...
Yeah.
So talk to me why, because I think that's quite unique.
I have a very vivid memory of this, and my memory is actually pretty bad just generally, but I can't remember what I did 3 days ago, but I remember flashes. I'm not sure if you're the same. I remember flashes of memories that are really important sliding doors moments in my life. And this one, I remember sitting at my grandma's dinner table with my dad in the afternoon on a Sunday like I normally would, catching up with my grandma. And back then, you'd still have 90% of the property listings in the Sunday Times, and she would always buy the Sunday Times, and I would go there and read the Sunday Times, be fascinated by the real estate section. And there was this little black and white 3-liner from a private sales person who owned their own property, selling their own piece of land
and putting it in the paper,
and they, piece of land, this many square meters, call. And it was crazy. I was like, Dad, I want to get this, and I hadn't gone to the bank, haven't figured it out. And he was like, well, do you want to go put an offer in? And we hadn't even thought about it. We just did it.
Yeah.
And then went to the bank. It all worked out at the time. And then I owned a piece of land. I owned 500 square meters of land, and then I had to go and build it. So it was just sort of, they always say that 90% of success is just action.
Yeah, so many people like to pontificate and talk about what this could go wrong or that could go wrong.
It could have gone wrong.
Yeah.
And there's a bit of luck, and the last 10% is luck. So the people who spruik and people who take advantage of people use that as well to say, look, 90% of success is action, so you should do it today. But I can look back on my life and see a lot of that risk mitigated action was the difference.
I guess you did have your backstop. If your dad thought it was a terrible idea, he would have said, no, that is a horrendous idea.
So a little bit of advice.
So that would have helped having him in the background. What did your grandma think?
She's just always very happy to make me dinner on a Sunday night. So I was happy to eat it. That's so, yeah.
So what suburb did you buy in?
It was in Darch, which
that's a good suburb.
Well,
now.
it's a family suburb, but
nice big blocks.
Yeah, big enough block, and I didn't really understand development at the time. All I knew was that I didn't want to be in Tapping or Butler or Banksia Grove or Ellenbrook, where the house and land guys would try and send you. I wanted to be as close to the city as possible, and that's the closest I could afford. It was that or a 250 square metre block in Maylands behind the Coles on Guildford Road, and I still drive past that.
I was going to say, you probably would have done better with the Maylands.
Could have done, and that's the thing. I very much could have done better on that one, but again, doing something was better than doing nothing.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So doing that led me to then researching more about development, and did my first house behind a house in Bulgar.
And what age were you?
Later.
Yep. So 21,
22, I think, once I got to that one.
And so you were wanting to be close to the city because it just felt convenient for you at that age, or because you were doing research into supply and demand?
Just because, I was more rudimentary research than today, but it was just an understanding of, look, I don't want to be a part of all that stuff of just cookie cutter stuff out there. And look, Darch wasn't that much better. It was just that it was a bit closer, and if I can get this for this price compared to something 10 kilometres further out, why wouldn't I? That was about as far as I went when I was 18. So making those decisions. So from that point on, it was just, you learn a bit about that, and then you move to the next stage and do some more research, and then it just gets more and more complex if you're interested in it, and clearly I was.
And then your next purchase was in Bulgar, and you bought a house behind. So you did a double.
Did a house behind a house. I bought an old 3x1 across from in a nice little cul-de-sac street. Again, Bulgar, it's not a fantastic suburb, but it was what I could afford at the time, and from the equity that I created in the build of the first house in Darch, and I didn't know much about subdivision, but I was noting from all the real estate ads that it was something that people were making money on, and there was no course to do subdivision. There was no one teaching anything, and I just learned from doing, really. Again, getting the right advice from the right people and having a crack, and I was again pretty lucky that I was doing it in a time where nearly everyone was making money just being a part of the property market.
Yeah, getting your name on a title, and it was going up. It was a good exactly. Period, wasn't it?
You couldn't really go wrong from 2009 to 2015 if you held property. That you were going to do well, and again, I could have done better. There are other things I probably could have done in hindsight in that time, but with the information I had, just doing that obviously gave me the experience and the skills to continue on and learn more. And I'm guessing 10 years from now, I might look back on what I'm doing now and go, I could have made some better decisions than today. But you only make those decisions based on the information you have.
So, and then moving forward after the Bulgar property, did you sell one of them?
Sold a piece of land. It's the only thing I've ever sold, actually.
Yeah, right.
I've kept the rest of it, and sold a piece of land at the back. Just did a retainer split. And again, better decisions. If I held that for a year more, I could have sold it for about 60 grand more, I reckon.
Yeah.
So
everyone's a genius in hindsight.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, but use that money to move to my first Triplexs, and then the next.
Triplexs, where was that one?
I went out to Thornley there, and so this was in 2013, 2014, I think, and it was what I could afford at the time. The market was booming. I was still young.
And bought an old house, knocked it down, and then built
three street-facing houses on a corner near the train station. And again, I was getting a bit more information then. I certainly wasn't trading it as a business at that point. I was still that information. I was still working for the man, and at that point, you can see that step by step, learning what I was doing and more about understanding of being closer to amenities and things. Again, not a fantastic suburb, but it was just what I could afford, and it was still a good time, and that was the foundation for moving on to bigger and better things from there.
And so, did you then start having friends and family go, hang on, what are you doing with these? You've got 3 houses, and how does this work? Can you give me some advice on where I should buy? When did people start hitting you up and saying, what do you know that I don't know, or can I get some advice?
Well, yeah, I guess that sort of just takes me to the question a lot of people ask is sort of why you set this place up? What brought you to that realization that property was a thing that you really love? And the thing that stopped me getting into property for so long was I didn't want to be a real estate agent. There was all these connotations that I had from friends and people around me that you can be a slimy real estate agent, and I thought I could do a lot better than being that. And that was a really naive thing of me to think back then. It was, it's misguided in a lot of ways, because there are some fantastic real estate agents that add a lot of value. But at the time, I was young and just had the wrong connotations, and so I always thought, no, I'm not going to get into property. But when I was traveling, I watched I never watched TED Talks that much, but I watched a TED Talk. Someone in South Africa, someone I'd met along the way, said, Trent, you should watch this. It was 5 ways to know your path in life. Really like wanky stuff, right? The stuff I would never really watch.
I normally watch that stuff, so come on, Trent.
I don't remember the other 4 things, right? But the third thing I remember vividly, it was what's the one thing that you're pretty good at, that people know you for in terms of your friends and family, that you could help them doing. It's a very simple thing when you think about it, but I'd never really allowed myself to think about that and release myself to go, well, look, what am I good at? What could I actually add value to, rather than just being a strategic advisor or a commercial analyst or a consultant? What is that in a lot of ways? So I got really honest with myself, and whilst I was doing my field guide, my safari guide accreditation in South Africa, which I always promised myself I would do, so I'm a qualified safari guide, I had a bit of spare time up my sleeve in the middle of the bush, and remotely I got my real estate and mortgage broking qualifications, and my first ever client on a mortgage broking side, I don't know if you had the same thing, but was refinancing my parents' loan.
Yeah.
So
you got to start with your family. You got to start with the training wheels on, just in case you stuff anything up.
Yeah. So the first day I got back was, I think, like the 1st of April 2016.
Yep.
And that's when I started moving in that space. Yeah.
And so you traveled for a year and a half, and you just used equity out of your properties, or were you using your rental income that you were getting from your properties?
I'd saved enough, and the reason for the blog was not because I was super interested in being a writer. It was that I guess I built myself up with this big chip on my shoulder for so long. My parents were were in a quite humble position as a kid, and it probably gave me quite a chip on my shoulder, especially going to Trinity. A lot of kids had pretty well-off situations, and I was sort of
taking the boats to Rottnest,
we could
and
never
all those
do any of that
things.
stuff. And so I always sort of had this thing in my head that I had to make sure that I was really financially sound. So after 8 years of being on the terrace, it was a huge decision. It was a really daunting thing for me to even consider that this wasn't the right path for me, and that I was wrong the whole time. It wasn't this chasing the suits sort of lifestyle that was going to make me happy. I had a really existential sort of quarter life crisis at that point in time. I was like, well, what am I going to do? And that's why I thought I might be a safari guide. But
what's my purpose? Because
I imagine
you'd all of a sudden got into a financial position by taking action from 18 rather than taking maybe an extra 10 years that most people do. So you're chatting to your mates, and you're feeling quite financially secure and going, what is my purpose and what is making me happy? Because maybe the money or the equity wasn't making you feel as fulfilled as what you thought it was going to.
But a lot of people, they start their career at 25 or something like that. They spend 10 years figuring that out, and then they've got kids and a wife, and it's too late. And they might have figured it out, but then they don't know how to get out of that. And I was just really lucky that I started my career at 18, and I figured it out by 25 with no wife, no kids, and I still had the freedom to start again in a way and use the skills I had, but just take a different direction. So that's what I guess led me to being in that position.
Yeah, I love it. And before we move on into you actually starting up the company and how that went, give us a highlight of the year and a half, one highlight moment of your travels for a year and a half.
Oh, geez, there are a lot. I don't know if I could give you one, but, it took me from climbing mountains by myself at 9 p.m. at night in Iceland when it was still bright, because obviously it's sunny most of the time in summer there, to doing the W Trek in Patagonia, to jumping up and down in a moving concrete stadium at La Boca in Boca Juniors in Argentina, to learning how to dance salsa with the world champion salsa, world champion of salsa in Colombia. Like,
love it.
Those
And
things are amazing.
was it solo? Was it a solo
It's all
trip?
solo.
Love it.
I met my mum and in Egypt. We went and did the pyramids in Egypt, because we always loved doing that together.
Yeah.
And went to and ticked off my number one bucket list in the Democratic Republic of Congo, going and seeing the Eastern Lowland gorillas with my dad.
Love it.
So I made sure that those memories were special with those.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
You get a lot of people that say, "Oh, I'm going solo, Wanderlust trip," and they're on Instagram and saying, "Love solo trip," and then you actually have a chat with them. "Oh, so how long did you go traveling?" "Oh, I had 3 days by myself between catching up with friends and family. So a year and a half. I'm going to give that one to you, Trent."
Thank you. Yeah.
So you've done your trip of a lifetime, and I mean, now you must look back at that and go, "Well, thank goodness you got that one in."
Yeah, 100%. It's it's very frustrating, because the way that I live my life is that I will do sprints, I guess. I'll generally like to work for 4 or 5 months, work my ass off, and then take 2 weeks off, just me, or now it's my wife, but a couple of years ago it was just head off to Johannesburg, head off to the Kruger for a week and a half in Wi-Fi, a mobile 4G range, where I could still have my business working remotely, but just be sitting there watching elephants do their thing for 8 days straight whilst taking calls, just to get out. And last year we were supposed to be in Swaziland with Simone's parents, on a fantastic trip, and then see her family in Switzerland over Christmas, which is where they're from, and obviously none of that can happen. So I do feel very grateful that a lot of that I got out of my system at the time, because that was another thing that was holding me back for a while, is that I was continually looking out the window in the office back before I did that trip, going, I wonder what else is out there. And it wasn't only just trying to find somewhere, the thing that I want to do to make me happy, but it was also me questioning whether Perth was the place. And this podcast you've got is called Welcome to Perth, is Perth the place I want to do it? And I sort of did a bit of an audit of the world as well, going, are there other places, Rio, New York,
better
London,
lifestyles,
that maybe I'd prefer to live? Because maybe it's not the thing I do, maybe it's the place I am. And I can comfortably report that there is no better place, for me at least, than Perth. Obviously my friends and family are here, but if you can set up a good lifestyle in Perth, then it's really the best launching pad for anywhere else in the world that you want to go on holidays with. Everywhere else there was always some pretty bad downsides to the cool upsides you see on TV.
Yeah, so whether that's cost of living or free activities like the beaches,
safety, cleanliness, all those sort of things,
Yeah, enough of a vibrant city to be able to do things, but then not be in traffic jams for an hour and a half.
Anything like that. You think of a place like New York, you go, wow, it must be amazing to live there. It's a pretty tough place to live, You're spending about $1,000 a week on a studio apartment for starters, so you're never really getting anywhere. You think of a place like Rio, amazing, the lifestyle. I wish Perth had Rio's lifestyle, beach lifestyle. Everyone, tens of thousands of people out on Ipanema or Copacabana on a daily basis, just doing their thing as if they were just playing at the park, because their apartments aren't that nice to live in, so they're all out all the time, because the streets aren't that safe, so they stay on the beach where it's safer. It's always because there's a pro and con.
It's I was there for the World Cup,
so was
World
I.
Cup, 2014.
Yep.
And what an amazing place of the world. But it
7 years ago this week.
Oh yeah, I have been getting a few memories just popping up. It's good fun, isn't it? But I remember we just rocked up. We'd had a few big nights in Miami, and then we got a cruise down through the Caribbean and got dropped off in Rio. And we were feeling a bit shaky because we hadn't had many quiet nights for the whole trip yet. And we got to our hostel, and then we started walking down to the main beach. And within 5 minutes of that walk, we watched a lady get her handbag stolen, and then these thugs grabbed some other stuff off her and take off on bikes. So again, I think people's perception is all the beautiful things,
the postcard stuff.
But I saw that firsthand. And then there was other instances where you're like, oh, I've got to be pretty pretty wary here because there's some dodgy characters and with the favelas, and it's strange, isn't it? How you got the favelas and then you got these big high-rise buildings very close to each other. It's two worlds, isn't it?
And you'd never really know as a tourist what's what. It all sort of blends in quite easily, but the locals know and they keep their distance. And so a lot of people just ignorant bliss, but especially with those favelas, they've cleaned up a lot, but still, it's not somewhere I'd probably want to bring a family up.
So now fast forward, you've set up the company and you had friends asking for a bit of advice or help. And I mean, starting up a company is tough. And then you're making calls and people aren't calling you back and you're trying to get some momentum. How was that first year of starting up a business?
I set myself this goal. I said, look, if I can just make 60 grand a year, just, a normal salary and get by in the first year, then it's a good starting point. If I can, and therefore that would be, X amount of clients, can't remember what it would have been, but just enough work along the way, then it would have been a good start. And for anyone looking to start their own business, it's not about, being something massively in the first year. It's just about getting a foundation so that you've got a concept that you've proven up. And that's all I wanted to do, is prove up that, again, I already proved to myself that the financial side wasn't what made me happy. It was the difference I was making. So as long as I had enough to put food on my plate, and then I could work on that going forward. And, that first year was a case of, a couple of referrals from my dad's mates who were keen on doing something that I'd done before, and then a little bit of marketing and trying and testing different ways to reach people. And, it was enough. It was enough to keep going and get by. And it was, you think about the stuff that we're doing now and compare it to where my capacity was 5 years ago or 4 years ago. There's no way that we could even consider that. So people say the world has a way of giving you enough that you can handle, or just enough that you can handle and not too much. And I think that I've been pretty lucky in that way. There's always been enough to keep me stressed and fulfilled enough at the same time along the way.
And so you were doing the finance, you were doing the negotiation, you were helping through the settlement. So you were trying to do the whole process for the client. Did you have anyone? You didn't have anyone working for you at that point?
Oh, when I first got back, obviously not. I was in that first year of being open. I was working out of the back of a small office. Initially, it was off my coffee table, and then it moved to the last office we're in, and now we're in this office. So, when I first started, it was just myself. And when we first moved into the last office, it was just myself, and a month or so later it was the next staff. So moving to 10 staff now, that's why we've moved to this office. We just outgrew the last one, but not for a second did I think in that time frame that we would have grown to achieve what we've achieved in that time. There's no point planning for that either. I think there's a lot of people that have 5 and 10 year business plans, and look, that helps a lot of people get their head around things, but for me it's really just about ticking goals and moving along, and then see what you've done in that time frame. Because I don't know about what your perspective is, but for me, life never really ends out the way you plan it to be. It often ends out better than you expect most of the time, but it never ends out anywhere like what you thought it would have been 5 years ago.
My 5-year plan has changed many times.
Yeah. I remember, here's a good Perth reference, and it's quite personal really. I remember being at Cheek back in 2009 and being 19.
On a Wednesday night in Subiaco, for those that don't. Subiaco used to be the night spot for every 18-year-old to probably 22 is thinking, what, Subi was the place to be? But 12 years ago it was.
I remember being 19 and all these, cool kids around, and way too cool for me, and all these really pretty girls, and thinking, man, I'm never going to be able to land a girl like this, and thinking that would make me happy. And I remember being on the balcony there at Cheek, just looking up the stars, I wish I could be 25, so at least I could be, maybe I'm cooler than I am now, maybe I could get a cool girl or whatever it is, and thinking that I would have X, Y, Z by that time. I'd want to be married by this time, I want to have kids by this time, have this job. And I look back at that, I would tear that up as quick as possible, because there's no way I'd want a lot of those things that I wanted when I was 19 years old to happen at least now.
But you've got to sort of have those experiences along the way from 19 you to now to be able to probably realise that. Yep. What would you tell your 19-year-old self?
I'd say chill out. a little bit because, you set these life plans and life goals by what I think your parents achieved back then, and things change, context change. I'm 31 now. I don't want kids for a long time, but back then I would have been really disappointed in myself if I didn't have kids by 30, because my parents had me before they were 30 and things like that in terms of life goals. And also, I probably wouldn't have told myself to not take the path I took because it ended up in a place where I'm really happy and fulfilled now. But also, probably took till I was 22 when I went to Africa for the first time and saw some real context about people who had nothing, who were just so happy and so blissfully happy in a way. It was then that I learnt my first lessons about what really should start to make you happy in life.
I love it. And so you now have a wife?
Yeah.
Where did you meet your wife?
I'm married to the beautiful Simone. I met her. She actually found me on Couchsurfer.
Yeah.
7-ish years ago. She was a Swiss girl coming to do a capstone course in English in Perth. And I'm very lucky.
Capstone, is that electrical?
No, capstone as in like the last sort of proficiency certificate.
Okay, sorry.
For English course.
Yeah.
Because Swiss people, they know English, German, French, Italian, 4 languages coming out of school, but she wanted to really get that global certificate to say she's proficient, she's fluent, right?
I'm
so she was over here, and she got to this English school, as you see them over in Northbridge. There's a lot of them around there. And she came to Perth because she wanted to meet different people, and the place was full of Swiss people. And so she's like, this is ridiculous. I want to meet real Australians. So with nothing, for no reason other than to literally make friends. Yeah. And so she was this very innocent little 19-year-old, and I was I'm 5 years older than her.
So you were the cool 25-year-old.
Well, I was still not the cool 31-year-old. I was never the cool one, but I was happy to take her out and show her around, and from that point in time, we sort of just hit it off. It wasn't my plan. I was just in the same headspace as well, about 24, 25, just trying to meet new people and not be in such a routine, which you can get in Perth. You can get very the clicky. Same streets, the same gyms, the same friends all the time. So I was trying to meet new people, and she was my best friend, and we knew that she was going to go back and study her degree. So we knew that wasn't a relationship there initially, but we stayed best friends until 3 or so years ago, and we did a bit of traveling together when I was traveling through South America, and eventually I realized that this girl was too good to let go, and I put it on the line and said, I want you to come to Australia and start your career here. And she started at PwC herself as well, and she now works at an even more prestigious consulting firm now, because she's that capable and talented. I'm very lucky, and we got married a couple of years ago, very happy. Yeah.
And when did you get married? Switzerland?
We got married at Kings Park. Got our I guess for a visa really to get it done. We were supposed to get married in Switzerland about 3 weeks ago in the Alps, and unfortunately, Simone was actually in quarantine, coming back from seeing her family for a month. So she was in quarantine the day that was her birthday, and the day we were supposed to be married in Switzerland.
Ouch.
It was pretty bad. Yeah. But look, when you think about the context of other things that could have happened, we're pretty lucky, and we're still married. Eventually we'll get the wedding, and it'll be fun.
Just may take a little bit longer.
Yeah.
Well, and so now going back to business chat. So starting with a couple of your dad's mates that knew that you sort of, had your way with numbers and sort of knew what you're talking about in 2016, into 17, 18. How many clients have you now helped? Gee, that's a question without notice. So
yeah.
I've just sort of thrown it. So you can be approximate, but
no, I think it would be somewhere over 100 developments that we've done. We're currently in that we're a part of or managing, of which about 45 we're managing at the moment, and now we're moving from that sort of helping someone with a Triplexs, which is a bread and butter of what we do, identifying and developing something like that, to apartment complexes and childcare centres and things like that.
A little bit more sophisticated.
And that's the thing I've always thought we're going to grow with our clients. So as we make our clients money, and they become more sophisticated with what they're doing themselves, they ask for more things from us, and we grow with that and offer those services too. So it wasn't a case where I was ever considering that we were going to be offering those services 4 or 5 years ago, but it's a natural progression now to something that people expect of us as well.
Yeah, people, as they trust you and you do a good job, then they want to get a little bit more aggressive and go for those bigger projects.
That's right.
Do you think there'll be a point where triplexes, you can't, there won't be many good opportunities for triplexes out there in Perth?
Yeah, the interesting thing about that strategy is that it's very much a Perth-specific thing, and in our time right now, in 50 years, triplexes, or even earlier than that, probably 20 years, it just won't be a thing anymore. The planning rules are changing right now to nearly kill them altogether in the next year or two for a lot of places around Perth. And when you think about other cities around the world, that there isn't a thing called a triplex. They don't build 3 houses on a quarter acre in New York or in Aberdeen or in Amsterdam or in
Tokyo.
London. Most people don't even consider property development as a profit-making scheme because they were priced out of it 100 years ago. Mm-hmm. It's now institutional developers that are getting apartment buildings done, and they're the only ones that can afford to do that. So this strategy specifically that we help most of our clients with normal mum and dad sort of cash, it's only relevant to this part of time in I guess Perth property market's maturity. We'll get to a point where places like Morley will be filled with apartment buildings, and all the rest of the properties will be at a very minimum already triplexes, and you won't be able to really develop those unless they all get amalgamated into a new apartment building, which will price out most mum and dads. So that's the case in a lot of places in the first 20 k's of Sydney, for example, and they're probably 20 years ahead of us.
And so I guess Perth, the way that Perth has had its urban sprawl, that probably has a little bit of a difference to Sydney's market. But do you think that urban sprawl is going to stop? Has it already stopped?
It should stop. I think it's horrendous how our planning laws, not really our planning laws, but I guess our house and land industry has predicated this sprawl that is worse than any other city in the world. We are the most sprawled city in the world, and it's because of what is a massive industry in our city, which is the house and land industry, which pushes that as a product to people out there, and is a huge employer of people too.
So that's jobs, and then that means power and pressure on politicians.
Politics, yeah, it's mainly politics. Some of the most powerful people in Perth are land developers, and they drive who gets elected.
And then that way, they're still making money by opening up another block of land.
The next farm south of Bulgar that no one needed to develop. To be honest, Bulgar doesn't need to exist. Ellenbrook shouldn't exist. Alkimos shouldn't exist. All those people that are there, if they all weren't given the option to live that far out, they'd all be living in median density properties within 30 k's of the city,
which would be a better lifestyle. I
imagine, vibrancy,
for them.
The money that could have been saved from the billions of dollars in infrastructure that goes out there that the state government
stations
could go into the hospital problem that we're dealing with right now. Could deal with the train issues. Metronet could have been done 10 years ago. Beaufort Street would have never struggled like it did. Subiaco wouldn't be the hole that it's been for years, right? All these places would have that many more people supporting small business in these areas. But because
that's
they're
what
pushing
it is,
out,
isn't it?
That's the big reason, is because there hasn't been the demand, because people have been sold the idea that they want to be 40 k's from the city in a brand new house and land package. It's unfortunately the way that most people have been given an opportunity to own property.
And I guess the awesome thing about right now is technology and the internet, and at the scale that everyone now uses it. So people are starting to do more research. People are starting to look into things, more. And people, just like your podcast, people can listen to that, and then they can self-educate. So they can start making more informed decisions about their property purchase, rather than maybe just only being able to listen to mum and dad that may have just, they did that, so then they've just followed that. So I guess that's an awesome time for people in our generation, because it's up to you to do the research, rather than having to rely on your elders or your
being sold something based on an idea with no proof because the internet didn't exist. It's a very egalitarian society these days. If you want to be informed, you can be informed. And unfortunately, it's the people who are probably the least informed, the most vulnerable in society. They're the ones that are sold the marketing schemes that are very well put together by the building companies.
Yeah, good marketing. Yeah,
it's amazing marketing.
Yeah,
and that's how they get them.
So if you were to talk to a 22-year-old Perth person that's just got, they've got their first job out of uni, they're making some decent money, they've got, their 10% deposit or maybe even 20% with a bit of help from mum and dad, what advice would you give them about what sort of asset to look for and, what type of area?
Yeah, I'd say the first thing would be to keep it as close to the city as possible. Maximize the land component. If that land component has subdivision potential, whether you have the money to do anything about that or not, then that's better. And stay off the main road. Stay off the roads on Google that are coloured yellow. Right. So if you stuck to that, you'd be pretty safe, especially in this market right now.
Yep. And so apartments obviously land content.
Well, there's no land content.
Yep.
So stay away from apartments. Try not to get a villa. Try and get something that's got a bit of land at the back.
So a big old house that maybe needs a little bit of work, but it's got a nice backyard and it's got that old school washing line out there still.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that. That there is opportunity in that land, because at the end of the day, land appreciates. That's why we pay tax on it, and houses depreciate. That's why we get depreciation reports. So when a property's value goes up, it's not because the house went up. It's because the land went up more than the house went down.
And so Perth Market's obviously had a really good run for the last 12 months, and that's coming off a pretty tough 5-year period, really. So do you see, when we're sort of just starting to get to the levels of where that market was in sort of 2015, I would say, but you're the expert, you tell me, and where do you think there's more growth to come over the sort of the short to medium term?
Yeah, so we're probably about 10% still below where we were at the last peak. And a lot of people, we're quite self-defeatist in Perth. We've been kicked in the nuts for so long that we're nearly still not believing what's happened in the last 12 months, that it's going to have to reverse again. It's going to go down again. The reality is we're still 10% lower than the last boom, and that was when interest rates were at about 6%. Interest rates are at about 2 to 2.5% now. So affordability is way through the roof compared to that time, and the demand supply ratio is as tight. So it doesn't make sense that it's the city with the highest median wage has the best affordability. We really should be sitting there at about 70% of Sydney's median value, which is 1.1 mil. So, our median price, in my opinion, at the end of this cycle, which I think will last another 3 or 4 years based on demand and supply outlooks and interest rate stability, which is super important for people, should be that our median should head from 510, which it is now, to about 700. And that's my humble opinion. I don't have a crystal ball, but if I was to look through it, I think it should be there. And then you'd start to be getting a bit nervous about buying property at that point in time, unless there were other extenuating circumstances continuing to push demand on and keeping supply tight. But once interest rates start to rise and affordability starts to tighten, unless wage growth really starts to come on, which it has done and it will continue to do until borders open and more people can come in for the labour market, then it starts to just get unaffordable at that point, and then the market starts to fall away. So
where we naturally probably should sit is around about Brisbane, so being sort of that third capital city in Australia for median house price.
Yep, we're way undervalued right now, and people say, it's been crazy or this huge rush. We've just been making up for borrowed time. We really should have been having this push a couple of years ago, and the reason we haven't is just because we've been losing so many people to the East Coast and to overseas pre-COVID, because Perth isn't a cool place to be apparently, and therefore the demand side from the population growth just hasn't been there. Over the 5 years from 2015 to 2020, we had 17,000 people total come into Perth, right?
Wow.
As a net amount, right? We had 30,000 last year. And that is pretty much the reason for the difference in prices now. It's demand versus supply. Supply has continued to drop. Last year we built 40% of the houses that we built 5 years before that.
Wow.
So there's the demand and supply. It's a really easy way to explain why prices have gone up.
And why rental prices have gone up, I think about 17% since the moratorium finished.
Yeah, but they're still about 15% lower than they were in the last boom. So we're all complaining about how rental prices have gone up.
It's still cheaper
the
than it
average
was
rent's
in
425 bucks. It was $475 in 2015.
So are you worried about there was these building grants that got announced middle of last year, and then everyone went out and bought a block of land and then built, and the home and land package people were licking their lips.
Yep.
And now build costs have obviously gone up. All of these builds are starting to come to market. Is from you looking at the building approvals with the supply and demand, are you worried that there's going to be too much stock coming onto the market?
Yeah, that building grant idea was a really bad idea. The market was already recovering through COVID before the grants came in on the 4th of June last year. So the building industry didn't really need it, and they weren't prepared for it either. And that's the big thing. They were signing up. Some of the biggest companies in Perth closed their doors in September for the rest of the year because they just couldn't handle any more work. They didn't have the contracts people, the admin people to do any of it. So
the brickies.
Yeah, and what's happened is someone's got $45,000 in grants, but if they haven't built by about March this year, so about 4 months ago, they would have been hit by a price rise of about 50 to 60 grand. So it's actually cost them more to have that grant than it would have if the market had just moved the way it was. No builder ever before has had to do what they've just done in the last few months, which is provide their clients with huge, pretty much 15 to 20% price increases based on what was signed 9 months ago. It's horrendous because it kills people. But back to the demand supply side, about 17,000 new homes have been built because of these grants or are going to be built. The only saving grace I would suggest for people, if they aren't in a situation where they've bought in the house and land package space out on the fringe of Perth, is that most of it has been pushed through the abattoir, I like to call it, the meat processor of the house and land package scene. So of the 17,000 grants, I'd say about 14,000 have gone out to the Bold Ibises, Ellenbrooks, Alkimos, Byford areas, just adding way more supply on what is already chronically oversupplied areas that can't support their own price points. Most of them haven't actually gone into the first 30 kilometres of Perth because it's not that easy to be able to build and develop and get those grants based on that. So what you're going to find, again, is a widening of the wealth gap, building of tale of two cities, really, where there's the haves, people who have got property within 30 k's of the city, and the have-nots, people who essentially have got property outside that on the house and land fringes. They're going to struggle, and the people inside will see massive price rises because of an undersupply and continual demand.
And then so let's say on the next 2 years, prices go up 20%. If people see median house prices going up 20% in the next 2 or 3 years, really that's saying that Cottesloe prices have gone up 40%, but ones out in Baldivis have actually dropped down, 20%. Talking just, simple numbers.
That's how it always works, right? So we see the Perth median house price and we all think that that's the gospel, and it's really not. When Perth's median house price goes up 10%, that doesn't mean your house went up 10%. Yours might have gone up 20. Yours might have gone up none, right? And it depends on...
It's a simplistic sort of number to look at, isn't it?
It's really an arbitrary number. I don't like reporting much, but that's the only one that the reporters like to talk about because that's the one they can consume. So, that is the reality, essentially. Those suburbs like Cottesloe and the ones that emanate out from there, they are the smart money. They're blue chip for a reason because smart people with a lot of money live there and choose to live there. Therefore, they'll continue to make good decisions and have a lot of money. It's just the point of being out there. It's what people do. And they will probably always grow as their wages grow faster. Those suburbs will grow in value faster than the ones out on the fringes. It's not a judgment on anyone. It's just the reality.
Yep. And it's always been that way in every other capital city
as well,
will be. Isn't it?
Yeah, exactly right. So those areas, Cottesloe started moving in 2018. It went up about 20%. And then we talk about now how it's gone up 25% in the last year. Properties that were selling back in September for 2.5 mil, the same sort of property on the same street is now 3.5 mil in Cottesloe. It's only 9-10 months ago. And that's because they have people who live there have the capacity to pay that, and they will because there's no supply.
And are you worried that people will go, Perth's not a cool place to live when borders do open up, maybe in a year's time or 18 months' time, and then we might have that, net migration story happen again after the last building boom and mining boom?
Well, look, inevitably, I think that's the thought process of a lot of young people in Perth. We have a little bit of a brain drain, not massively like Eastern Europe and those sort of places, but people generally like to try the life out in Melbourne and Sydney and London and New York. A lot of our friends have done it, right? But I think what this this pandemic has shown a lot of people is Perth is a very safe place. And not just Perth people, but people around the world. And more so to that point, governments invest in infrastructure projects not because they're altruistic, but because they invest in infrastructure projects in times like this, in world crisis times, not because they're altruistic, but because this is when the interest rates are the cheapest, so they can do it without paying that much money for it to the banks. So they get a lot more done without paying interest. They call it nation building, but it's just they could have done it 5 years ago. They do it now because it's cheaper to do it. So this is where all the labour market in Perth, for example, we're building massive infrastructure projects. We don't have the people for it. I need more staff. I can't find the people, and that's across the whole of Perth. The second the borders open up, there may be a little bit of a brain drain, but I think a lot of those people who have already gone, they've come back now, and that's it. They realise now, let's start a family, or Perth is a good place to be. But more so, just like after World War II, I'm a big believer that there will be a lot of people coming here from a migration space for safety and for opportunities for work. And we will have a huge need. We'll have another 4, 5, 7 wave. And with that comes a massive pressure on the demand side for rentals, which then flows through into the purchase space about 6 months after that. Once the borders open, a lot of people are, everyone's going to leave. No, I think there will be a massive migration towards Perth.
Yeah, so it'll be net positive massively.
Yeah, and then eventually you might find at some point people get bored of it. The Irish move back to Ireland, the English go back, and the people from the East Coast go back to where they came from, and then you start to see a bit of a drain, and that's a natural cycle, because Perth seems to do really well when the world's on its knees, because they need our resources and therefore minerals, our work. The second the world's doing really well, we become boring again. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does. I've never thought of it that way, but that makes a lot of sense. That's fascinating.
Think of the last time we had a GFC in 2008. We went through a 5-year super cycle because everyone needs our iron ore.
Yeah, and I guess governments around the world need to build and stimulate the economy, because all interest rates are coming down, not just in Australia. So that pushes those prices up too. Yeah, I love it. Trent, this has been a great chat, mate. I've really enjoyed it. I've been seeing what you've been doing from afar. I've been seeing you on Channel 9 News as well. So you are now a professional media person. You didn't go down the photography path, but you are in media.
Well, yeah, and it just comes from wanting to try and make a difference. This industry I recognise, and it's why it took me a long time to move formally into it, is very unregulated. There are a lot of unscrupulous people that make a lot of money and lose a lot of people money with the wrong intentions, because there is a lot of space for doing the wrong thing. And I guess that chip on my shoulder has always been to try and do the right thing and have integrity and make a difference. And I think it's pretty easy to stand out when that is the first thing you're thinking about, whether it's on Channel 9 or radio or doing the podcast. If you're actually focused on making a difference, then that is a little bit of a standout in real estate, where there are so many people just looking to take money off you.
Yeah, and those ones, they're in their job for two years, and then they go into another industry, whereas I reckon you'll be around for some time yet, Trent. So
it's nice growing up with you, mate.
So thanks for coming on, mate. I've really enjoyed the chat, and good luck with your next 5-year plan.